Now from the City Hall to the boardroom, where European companies are rapidly setting ambitious targets. But what about delivery? What can we expect in the next few years? And how can corporates stay focused as they look at their impacts on emissions and nature? Joining me to debate turning targets to transformation are Francesco Sorazzi, CEO of the Italian green supermajor Enel, Gilbert Gustein, the CEO of the Swiss fragrance and flavour company Firmenich, and Jürgen Esser, Chief Financial Officer at Danone. Lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us. Now let's start with a question at the heart of today's event, and that is, of course, nature. What are your specific nature-based goals and how are you measuring them? Let's kick off first with Francesco.
First of all, let's say that we are part of this big alliance, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is something that has, let's say, it's the sister of the IPCC when you talk about climate. It's a convention in which we set together with many other entities and companies targets that deal with biodiversity and nature preservation under a certain, say, hierarchy, which is basically avoid, minimize, restore, and offset. These goals are those that guide us developing our work. And actually, we have today more than 180 projects in all the world that have to do with mitigating and restoring biodiversity in certain parts of the world.
And Jürgen, you, of course, are also working with science-based targets as well. But what about science-based targets for nature specifically? What are you looking to target, Jürgen?
Yeah, look, as a food company, healthy food needs healthy nature. And therefore, what we are doing is we are really trying to integrate our nature targets into our targets for climate. This is very complex and very multidimensional because nature is complex. But we have been piloting, for example, with our Alpro brand since year 2018, how to define nature targets and how to integrate them into our climate targets. And this has been a very successful pilot for us. And this is now what we are working on with the initiative for science-based targets for nature in order to articulate that journey.
And what about you? Same question to you, Gilbert. What is Firmenich up to?
Nature is the base, and we have set ourselves science-based targets to limit global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees in line with the Paris Agreement. And since then, we have been acting on these measures every single day. And also on top of this, on top of the actions that we are taking every day with the way we engage with farmers across the world, from Madagascar and vanilla, to vetiver in Haiti, because at the end of the day, we source 450 botanicals from all over the world. And why is nature critical? Just to give you an example, you need 3.5 tons of petal roses to produce 1 kilo of essential oil that we use in your perfumes and in your shampoos. So that's why nature is the base. And we needed to harvest it in a very responsible way. And this is why regenerative agriculture is key.
And Jürgen, why do you think is a nature positive approach important from the Chief Financial Officer's perspective, where you're sitting?
Look, you can look at that discussion from very different angles. But in the end, the conclusion is always the same. Our shareholders are urging us to transform to the most sustainable business model. Our clients, our retailers want us to have the most sustainable product portfolio. Our employees, they want to work for a company which is showing the path, who is a pioneer in sustainability. But the most important, I believe, is the consumer. Because the consumer is more and more aware of climate change, of the need to protect nature. And the consumer is making his choice, buying products and buying brands who have a positive contribution. And so this is what everything is circling about. And this is also why me as a CFO, we need to make sure that we have a holistic approach as a company.
With the consumer, of course, at the heart of it all. Very interesting. And Francesco, tell me, how is Enel's impact on water security interlinked with its climate efforts? Does your work on one help with the other, do you think?
Definitely. I think it is something that Jürgen said very well. Nature is a very complex system, and one part of nature affects all the others. So clearly, we deal with electricity, but water is very often instrumental to either generate or help generating electricity in many ways. And there are lots of ways in which we can mitigate the use of water, recycle water, and reduce the use of water for our production. In fact, we have one of our tasks has to do with the fact that we will use less and less water going forward. And that water we will use, we will recycle in order to not have an impact on the water balance of the areas of the world where we operate. Why that is important is because clearly, if you want to reduce the risk going forward of your operations being sustainable, you need to reduce the footprint not only of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, but also of land use, water use, and in general, natural resource around the world.
Okay, and I'd like to ask you all regarding climate and nature and its impact through the value chain with suppliers and customers. Are you asking specifically for SBTs there, for science-based targets?
We do. This is what we are driving across the chain with our suppliers. We feel very proud as a company that we are running at 100% renewable electricity globally since early 2020, and we have also two of our manufacturing facilities in the world, one in Singapore and one in South Africa, that is running on carbon neutral. And as a company, we've set ourselves a very clear goal, to be carbon neutral by 2025, and we are committed to deliver against this goal.
And now I'll go back to Jürgen, because Danone has a carbon-adjusted recurring earnings per share metric. Do you think that other companies should too? And are you factoring in other impacts on nature?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because it's all about transparency in the moment. And what we thought with this EPS adjusted by the theoretical cost of our carbon emission is to start to have a dialogue with our shareholders and our stakeholders, which is not a dialogue which is only about financials or a dialogue which is only about non-financial impact. It's to have a dialogue which is totally integrated. And having this dialogue about a P&L, the earnings you are having by share, and adding to it the today theoretical cost of our carbon emission has been proving to be extremely powerful. Is that the best KPI moving forward? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that the engagement we have received from our stakeholders, the engagement for discussion received by our shareholders, to have finally one KPI which is embracing holistically the impact we are having, I think that has been a big success.
And Francesco, I'd like to ask you, because energy investment is, of course, 50% of what's needed for net zero. Now, Enel is investing 160 billion. But my question is that enough to get renewable capacity to the level industry really needs?
Of course, alone, Enel cannot change the world, but it is for us a big jump. With this decade, which we already, by the way, in 22, so it's already started, we will treble the capacity of renewables that we have. Mind you, we are already the fastest growing company in that space since now 4 years. So this is the 5th year in which we beat the world record of capacity installation, which is needed in order to meet the requirements of our strategy going forward. We have 54,000 megawatts of installed capacity. We'll go up to 145,000 by end of the decade, which means we will remain basically at 3%, that's the number, of the world total renewable energy space at that time, being at 3% now. So that tells you that even trebling our capacity just keeps us in the space. That gives you an idea of how fast this world is expanding in the renewable energy space and how much money is thrown at it.
And what we've been hearing, of course, at the CDP Europe Awards 2022, the message always being brought home is that it has to be together, that no one can do this alone. So just on that point of collaborations, are you involved in collaborations that bring about economic, environmental and social outcomes in local areas?
The key word, you're right. The key word is collaboration, because we realized we are all interdependent. this decade, has been, the past decade, has been the warmest on record, and we have to work together in order to make a difference. Internally, as a company, we have decoupled our growth output from our emissions, and we are working with our suppliers, to bring down their emissions. And just to highlight how the system works, we are the scope 3 emissions of the L'Oreal, Unilever, and Nestle of this world. Our suppliers, will be our scope 3 emissions. So we have to work hands in hand, across the chain to make sure that, we bring the global emissions down. And this is where, we are all supporting each other on this one.
And Jürgen, same question to you briefly.
Stepping back a little bit, in Danone, when we talk about climate or we talk about nature, we need to talk about agriculture. In Danone, 2/3 of our CO2 emission has a link to agriculture, 90% of our water footprint. And so, yes, there are things we can do alone. And we have very ambitious projects like moving to 100% regenerative agriculture in France for everything what we are sourcing locally in France by 2025. But we need to recognize that we are present in more than 100 countries. And so in order to have an impact, rather faster than later, we need to use the power of the collective. And so in that sense, already in 2019, we spearheaded a coalition which is called One Planet Business for Biodiversity, in order to group together companies who have the same vision, who have the same ambition to strengthen biodiversity. Companies who had, until that moment, also tried, like us, to work with their own approaches, to work with their own definitions, and where we have now, I think, a powerful set of company and stakeholders together who are harmonizing their approach, which is the only way to create scale, to multiply impact. And today we have a number of great examples on the ground where we can have impact on local communities.
On the issue of biodiversity, which, by the way, is extremely fragmented and very difficult to manage because it varies a lot, thank God, this is incredibly complicated but a fascinating experience. You can even improve the biodiversity of the areas you work in, provided you put some attention and some work on that. We have incredible experiences in Latin America for areas where we started working, and after several years of our presence there, the biodiversity has improved when compared to the situation we presented at the beginning. The secret here is to kind of work with the people at the location and not just with government entities somewhere from far away. And having the communities together is fundamental for the success of these endeavors.
Are you optimistic that we will achieve a net zero nature positive global economy by 2050? Francesco?
Yes, I think we will reach a net zero. The only question is how big this net word is vis-a-vis the zero word. And I think the lowest net is the best solution. So fight for zero and then put the net at the end.
I'm 100% convinced that we are on the right way. I mean, today, 90% of the global economy have committed to net zero. That's great. Now we need to go from commitment to action, which means setting targets, measure achievement, and raising the bar. When you see what we have done in Danone, I mean, already in 2015, we have committed to net zero. In 2019, we have peaked the absolute emission of CO2. And since then, we are decreasing year on year. And 2021, and we have just published our results. We have been decreasing by almost 4% our CO2 emission. And guess what? A lot of it contributed to regenerative agriculture. So I think we can do it. We cannot do it alone. We can do it together. And I think we are on the right pathway.
And the same question to Gilbert.
I am an eternal optimist, and I am definitely optimistic that we will hit these targets. Awareness is there. Everyone is raising up to the challenge. There are technologies that are available today that are helping us, accelerate this process. And I know, based on the information I have and the engagement that we have with suppliers, that are many technologies that are in the making that can help us also turbocharge against this target. So this target is on site. We are committed, and we are delivering. We will be delivering against our goals.
So quite an optimistic conclusion there. Thank you so much to you all. Thank you to Francesco Saraccia, CEO of the Italian green supermajor Enel, Gilbert Gostein, CEO of Swiss fragrance and flavour company Firmenich, and Jürgen Esser, the Chief Financial Officer at Danone. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.